Hey there, it's Kelly from Kelly's Astrology here. I'm an astrologer, teacher, and consultant. I share astrology with individuals just like you to help you understand yourself, but also to learn astrology so that you can help guide and inspire others. In this video, I'm going to talk a lot about Jupiter and Capricorn, and specifically I'm going to be addressing a question that I've received a lot from students and clients in the last few weeks about when will COVID-19 end? Now, I do want to be really clear. I don't think I can answer exactly when it will end, but I'm going to explore how what's happening with Jupiter and Capricorn is helping describe or symbolize some of the experiences that we're all encountering in 2020 and perhaps beyond. A lot of this information was shared in a blog post that I put up on my website recently called When Will COVID-19 End? A Look at Jupiter and Capricorn. So I'm going to share all the highlights of that blog post with you here in this video. But if you do want more, you're welcome to check my website out, kellysastrology.com, for a little more detail. So I'm not a virus or disease expert, and so I can't really comment from the medical side of things. What I've been reading from virus and science and health and medical experts is that it's more common or more likely that this virus is just going to stay here with us. And our experience in life going forward is figuring out how to live with this virus as a thing. And there's a couple relatively recent things that come to my mind that kind of confirm that, which is things like the SARS virus and the H1N1 virus that had a big impact, particularly in parts of Asia over the last 15 to 20 years. Those viruses, or the SARS virus at least, is a type of coronavirus. There's no vaccine that's been found for that one. And so we may or may not get a vaccine for this one. So I don't really have a sort of an astrological thing about, is it going to go away? Because in astrology, when we get questions like, when will something happen? We always want to clarify, like, is that going to happen first before we can talk about when? So I know that's not necessarily giving you answers, but what I think we can look at is how the condition of Jupiter in the sky is describing some of the extreme restrictions around movement and the heightened fear and worry about health. And so if we can identify some things that have maybe gone awry for the planet Jupiter that have perhaps symbolized from that sort of as above, so below our experiences in here on Earth in 2020, then we can have a look and see when those difficult factors for Jupiter will be ending or changing, to perhaps speculate as to when some of those issues may be less burdensome in the way that they are now. So when clients and students have asked me, when will coronavirus end? What I've really heard as the question is, when will they be able to do some of the things that they can't do now? When might they have a little bit more freedom or a little bit more flow to move about, in their sort of day-to-day environments, but even in the wider kind of global environment? I think they're really wondering, when restrictions might end. And also, I think a lot of us are wondering when the collective kind of mood might lighten or be a little bit more hopeful. And so these are the things I think we can really address with astrology. One point I just want to make is that I am talking in this video a little bit about the general collective vibe, things like the news headlines and those shared topics of conversation. This won't necessarily be your personal day-to-day experience. I know that the general tone of 2020 has been very heavy and sobering and cautious, but I also know that people are welcoming much longed for babies or getting married. Some people are having really successful years in their business or their career. So even though the collective mood can be somber and serious, individually, based on your personal cycles, your transits, your perfections, your progressions, all other types of factors in your individual chart, you may still be having some really wonderful moments that are worth celebrating. So this isn't necessarily going to describe everything that you experienced this year. I wanted to be really explicit that this is a look at the collective mood, if you like. So that said, we're all doing less travel and less socializing. So as much as there is sort of, personal pieces, there are some shared collective restrictions, if you like. Travel is not a real thing right now. Particularly, airlines are not running international flights, certainly to the capacity that they were before. And socializing is something that is happening on a much smaller scale. Many countries have these little pods or groups of between 6 and 10 people that you're allowed to socialize with, and no large group gatherings, of course. Health has been a huge topic. How the focus collectively on health has manifested, of course, depends on your personal situation, your age, your race, your financial situation. All of these things feed into how much you are or aren't affected by a collective health crisis. But even if you are or aren't personally directly affected, health is a topic you're hearing a lot more about and probably talking a lot more about. All of these things, gathering together in large groups, travel, even health and wellness, are all topics that are tied to the planet Jupiter. Jupiter is also about education, learning at all stages and ages and in all kinds of learning. And so the education industry is another industry that we've really seen have to, it's been suffering, but it's had to make changes, and there's just a lot of concern and worry about that. So Jupiter is a planet that represents travel, education, health, large groups. And these are all the areas that we've seen in some ways decimation or radical and fast changes this year in 2020. Jupiter is usually a planet that we look to, that we find hope and inspiration and meaning and purpose from. And so based on Jupiter's current difficult condition, a lot of these things are not available, they're blocked, they're inhibited, or, if we are finding meaning and purpose this year, it doesn't look the way we thought it would. So what I want to do is address 3 factors that are contributing to Jupiter's difficult astrological state, that are contributing to a lack of Jupiter things in the world right now. And so, we've got a lack of large-scale travel or long-distance travel. We've got a lack or a restriction around education and learning, from the primary, elementary level right up to the university postgraduate level. We've got a lack around health and vitality. There is a lot more concern around well-being, and we've got higher mortality rates and things like that. Jupiter is one of the planets that we use in medical astrology to identify practitioners that are going to have a positive impact on our health, but also to identify effective treatments for conditions we might be suffering with. So there's some of the things I'm thinking about. If Jupiter's not in great condition, maybe we don't have great practitioners for the health issues that are coming up. Maybe we don't have access to the best or types of treatment. Maybe there is a treatment, but it has a really negative impact even as it's doing the healing thing specifically. So this is all what's factoring into my thinking and to the points I want to make. So the 3 astrological factors that are hurting Jupiter right now: it is in the sign of its fall in Capricorn. So that's a very restricted place for Jupiter to start with. Capricorn is a sign ruled by Saturn. And Saturn is one of the malefic planets. So Jupiter has 3 signs that it struggles in terms of essential dignity. 2 of those signs are Gemini and Virgo. They're ruled by Mercury. And the 3rd sign is Capricorn, ruled by Saturn. So even though Jupiter is technically in a difficult condition by sign in all 3 of those signs, as I've reflected on this, it seems like something sort of extremely uncomfortable for Jupiter about being in Capricorn. Jupiter, of course, is ruled by Saturn here, and Saturn and Jupiter have opposing principles. Saturn is cautious and has some fear or hesitation. Jupiter is normally about growth and optimism. Jupiter represents expansion, while Saturn represents contraction. So Jupiter really is out of sorts when it is in a sign ruled by Saturn, and especially in Capricorn, where Jupiter is not only ruled by Saturn, but also in its fall. So being in a sign ruled by Saturn, I think, is another factor that's contributing to Jupiter's restricted tone this year. So Jupiter is less able to bring movement or hope or abundance or even to support vitality in this condition. Here, Jupiter has to cut back to play it safe, to think about the long term. Now, there can be good outcomes about that. Maybe you're not spending money on traveling and you're able to pay off a debt or to save more for your retirement, for instance. So if you're thinking more about long-term outcomes with Jupiter in Capricorn and less about immediately joyful experiences, you may be able to work with this energy in a really productive way. Now, that said, maybe you were in the hospitality or entertainment industry, and the way this has shown up for you is actually you've lost your income. So you don't have the luxury of thinking about what to do with your usual income. You're just trying to get by on much less than you normally did. So that's what I mean by it really depends on our starting places. And that's why everybody is having varying levels of experience in this sort of COVID-19 environment that we're all living in. So Jupiter is in fall, which is not a great place for a planet to be in the sign of its fall. It's also in a sign ruled by Saturn. So those two things are restricting for Jupiter. The third factor is that Jupiter is in a co-presence with Saturn. And that's a special word that just basically means Jupiter and Saturn are in the same sign. That further intensifies the impact that Saturn is having on Jupiter. Jupiter is very contained right now. It's like being locked up somewhere with a very strict, jailer or person making sure that you honor your conditions of lockdown, if you like. In some ways, the lockdown experience that we've all been experiencing is a really apt description of Jupiter's condition astrologically. Jupiter has had his wings clipped. He has been shut into a small space. He is being asked to think about things that he normally shies away from. These are not bad things to think about. It's good to plan for the long term, but we don't usually do that with the planet Jupiter. We usually use, planets like Saturn for that. Now, Jupiter does move through Capricorn every 12 years. So it's not new that Jupiter is in Capricorn, but it's these compounding factors that I think make this a slightly more difficult iteration of Jupiter in Capricorn than what we usually have. Jupiter was in Capricorn in 2008, and we did have some extreme economic contraction then, which makes sense. Jupiter is the planet of wealth. We know Capricorn, being ruled by Saturn, is the sign of contraction and restriction. However, in 2008, Jupiter was in Capricorn without Saturn there. So the combination of Jupiter being in Capricorn while Saturn is also there is a huge reason that this is such an extreme contracted experience of Jupiter that we're getting in 2020. Jupiter and Saturn are conjunct in the sky every 20 years or so, and they move about the signs that they make those meetings in. But to have Jupiter and Saturn specifically together in the sign of Capricorn is something that only happens once every 60 years. So the last time we had this specific Jupiter-Saturn arrangement, which we've identified and clarified is so difficult for Jupiter, was in the early 60s, late 1960, early 1961, and then the latter part of 1961. So it's about 60 years ago, 59 to 60 years ago. And the time prior to that was in 1901, early 1902. So that adds a level of significance and therefore kind of gravitas to the condition of Jupiter now, but also the events. Like something happening only once every 60 years is a once in a lifetime type of cycle. Now, all the specific dates around details and sign combinations are in the blog post. I won't waste your time with those today. For those of you who are, data fiends, you can check out the blog post for that. Now, of course, in 2020, it's not just Jupiter and Saturn together in Capricorn. We've also got Pluto there. And for the first 5 months of Capricorn, we did have the South Node there as well. So the other thing that's interesting when I looked back into that research of the last time Jupiter and Saturn were together in Capricorn in the early 60s and then in the early 1900s, Jupiter and Saturn sort of stayed together for relatively short periods of time, a few months here and a few months there. Part of what's interesting now is that Jupiter and Saturn are actually traveling together for almost 2 years. So Jupiter and Saturn are together in Capricorn. Jupiter's in fall here, and it's a sign ruled by Saturn. It gives Saturn a lot of power over Jupiter. Later this year, December 2020, Jupiter and Saturn will both, within a few days of each other, move into Aquarius. Now, this is going to be removing one of those 3 difficult factors for Jupiter. Jupiter will still be in a sign ruled by Saturn and will still be in a sign with the co-presence with Saturn. However, Jupiter is no longer in fall. So that is the first bit of improvement. It's the first glimmer of hope, if you like, that Jupiter gets looking forward from here as I'm recording this in July of 2020. Jupiter is an air planet. The qualities associated with Jupiter are heat and moisture, and air signs have the same combination of qualities, heat and moisture. So even though Jupiter doesn't have any technical strength in the sign of Aquarius, it's not in rulership or exaltation or anything like that, it is still a more comfortable place because the qualities of Jupiter, heat and moisture, are reflected in the qualities of the sign. We may, at that time, late December 2020 and then heading into 2021, with Jupiter now out of its fall, we may start to see some of that early research or feedback about some effective treatments or some progress to do with how we're managing, a post-COVID-19 world. It is definitely not the fix because remember we said there are 3 things challenging Jupiter at the moment and only one improves in December 2020. To have those final 2 things improve, we really need to have Jupiter leave a sign ruled by Saturn and to move out of the co-presence of being in the same sign as Saturn. That will happen when Jupiter moves into Pisces. Now, we do get a small taste of this in 2021. About mid-May 2021, Jupiter dips into Pisces for just a couple of months, mid-May to late July. Then Jupiter is back in Aquarius, where it is going to spend the second half of 2021 rejoining with Saturn. Jupiter will move into Pisces sort of for good, permanently. I want to double check the date here, end of December 2021. And so this is something I often describe with clients, when we're in a difficult cycle, there are usually a number of factors combining to make that uncomfortable or challenging for us. And so those 3 factors of Jupiter are combining to make 2020 a really extreme year of contraction for Jupiter. And to the extent that travel is important to you, that education and learning is important to you, and that health and vitality is important to you, these are things that are going to inhibit your experiences in 2020. Jupiter gets a little bit of improvement in December 2020. So we're going to see as we turn the corner into 2021, 1/3 of that problematic combination is removed. So it's like 1/3 of improvement or progress to do with the situation. I'm really interested to watch that mid-May to late July period of 2021, where Jupiter in Pisces gives a preview of what we can look forward to. I didn't want this video to be super depressing and, kind of flattening for people, but I did think it was important to be honest about how long it's going to take Jupiter to kind of recuperate from what it's been dealing with in 2020. It's a little maybe unfair, we might say, in the sense that Jupiter only gets better incrementally as we're coming out of this extreme challenge for Jupiter in 2020, but Jupiter got difficult overnight. And what I mean by that is, in 2019, Jupiter was cruising through Sag, one of the signs of its rulership, not having to deal with Saturn really to any extent at all. And overnight, on December 3rd, 2019, Jupiter just kind of came down to earth with a thud, left Sagittarius, moved into Capricorn, and kicked up a lot of this heavier restrictive energy that we had some momentum. It takes a while for the earthly gears to shift once the heavenly gears have changed. And so we had a few months in that early part of Jupiter in Capricorn where the momentum of Jupiter in Sag was carrying us forward. But by the time we got to February, March, Jupiter was really grinding to a halt. And, now the Jupiter and Capricorn vibe is kicking in. So obviously there's a lot I could say on this, but I wanted to give you that sense of the 3 factors affecting Jupiter in a difficult or restrictive way in 2020, to have an understanding about how to work with that. Jupiter and Capricorn is about long term. For me personally, travel is a huge part of my life. It's how I stay in touch with my family that are in Australia. It's a lot of what I do for work. I can travel around and teach people. So it's understanding that's not an option right now. So what are the projects that I can do from home? Of course, the online environment is a wonderful tool, but the blessing in disguise for me is, okay, you can get back to working on your book or other longer term projects that I often get pulled away from with travel. So it's that sort of silver lining and trying to identify what that is for you personally. So for more on this, do check out my blog post, When Will COVID-19 End? A look at Jupiter in Capricorn. Hopefully now this is giving you a sense of there is a bit of lightness to look forward to in 2021, Jupiter moving out of the sign of its fall, but still a couple of factors for Jupiter to manage. So a small improvement, but really needing to look to Jupiter in Pisces mid-2021, but really 2022 for that sense of more movement and freedom in ways that are more familiar to us to return. If you did like this video, please hit the like button, subscribe to my channel so you make sure you get all the updates as they come forward. If you've got any questions or comments on Jupiter in Capricorn, feel free to pop them in the comments below. I look forward to sharing more with you again soon. Until then, take care.